And now it's time for a Q&A from you, the viewers, and our first question comes in from Eric Ocha about the MiSTer FPGA platform. He says this needs more attention in the retro community, and I agree with him on that. So if you're not familiar with MiSTer, I think the first place to start is over at Smoke Monster's YouTube channel, where he's got a great video that explains exactly what it is and what you need to get going with it. In a nutshell, this is an FPGA-based single board computing platform that allows you to simulate original classic computers like the Apple II and the Macintosh and the Atari ST and the Amiga and many others, along with classic arcade games and classic game consoles. And what's different about this versus maybe a cheaper Raspberry Pi is that all of this stuff is getting replicated in hardware. FPGA chips are very special chips because they can be programmed to behave like other processors. So for example, you're trying to replicate the Sega Genesis. The 68000 chip is replicated inside that FPGA chip. They take all the other chips the Genesis had, including the sound chip and the Z80 coprocessor. All that stuff is replicated, and everything inside the FPGA communicates with each other exactly the way the original hardware did, but then it's outputting via HDMI. So you're getting a very good, clean picture with minimal latency because you are essentially doing all this in hardware versus having things interpreted in software like we see with emulation. Analog does this on their classic game consoles like the NT Mini we reviewed last year and the Super NT, which is the Super Nintendo console we reviewed this year. It is tremendously accurate, and you notice the difference over emulation immediately, and you can never go back again. So now this is a project that's open source, not all that expensive to get started, and definitely worth taking a look at if you are really a big fan of emulation and tweaking things on some of this kind of community-supported hardware. I also suggest taking a look at ETA Prime's YouTube channel because he's got a video about some of the classic consoles that he's been able to get working on his MiSTer. And the hardware here is a little tricky because you have to get this development board. This is the DE10 Nano that I am having delivered today. This is the first component of it. Smoke Monster says, though, you can do a lot just with this board. So there's something you can do right out of the gate buying this $130 board from TerraSic to get things started. But there's other components, like you saw in that stack on ETA Prime's thumbnail here, that you also have to get full compatibility. So some of the computers that you might want to replicate require some additional things. And all of that stuff you can get information on in Smoke Monster's original video there. So there are some community-developed pieces of hardware that attach to this commercially available development board. And when you have all those things together, you have the full MiSTer. But again, you can get started with MiSTer just with the board, which is what I'm going to do. In fact, my first video on this will be about what you can do just with the board because the development components that go to it are a little harder to get at the moment. There's also a great wiki on GitHub called the MiSTer Wiki, appropriately so. So you can get more information about all the stuff you need there as well if you prefer to read about it. And you can also get a list of all the things that you can run on MiSTer right now. So the list is growing every day. In many ways, this kind of reminds me of the early days of MAME and some of the glory days of the emulation boom of the late 90s when all this innovation was happening in the open source community so quickly. So you can see all the things that it runs at the time I'm shooting this video. Next week it'll probably be even more stuff, and the things it does run now will run better. So this is a very active project, and it's getting a lot of attention. So if you are into this kind of thing and love tweaking things and trying to get these projects to work, this is definitely something worth checking out, and I certainly will be doing it over the next couple of weeks as well.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Chris Allegretta, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Tom Albrecht, Too Much Sauce, Gerard Nuberg, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.